Hi, Councillor Flynn. Hi, Commissioner.
Hey, Kenzie.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Busy day?
Yeah, I'm afraid we had a very long hearing prior to this one, so we may be joined by a few fewer colleagues as a result.
No worries. Happy to keep it short and sweet.
But we'll wait for a couple more folks.
Of course. Councillor Bach, did you get
A
the hearing?
handout from you?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
We got it, and it has been circulated to all counselors. So.
Glad to hear that.
Yes, no, thanks for sending that over.
Of course.
And as ever, I appreciate your background, Nick.
I try and keep things interesting so when people get bored and kind of zone out, they can just look at the sports stuff.
Yeah. And have you added something to it, or is it just that you've shifted over so we can see more?
I don't know.
I don't remember the Celtics banner, but it might just have been the camera was centered differently.
It's possible, or I could have added it. I don't. It's been a while since I was at. I think the last hearing I was at was the budget hearing, so it could also just be like a slight shift of the laptop.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. All right, so we're live and recording, so we're ready to go in a minute. I see Councilors Braden and Flynn just waiting on, not quite yet. Just gonna wait on. We're also waiting for Pam from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. So just gonna give her another minute. Oh, here she is. All right. Okay. All right, let's get going. But I have to, sorry, pull up the opening statement here. A lot of all right. Calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach, the District 8 City Councilor. I'm also the chair of the City Council's Ways and Means Committee. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Councilor Ed Flynn of District 2 and Councilor Liz Braden of District 9. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. We will take public testimony at the end of this hearing. So if you wish to testify via video conference, please email Michelle, Michelle.a.goldberg, GOLDBERG, at boston.gov. So michelle.a.goldberg at boston.gov to sign up. When you're called, we ask that you state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes to ensure that all comments can be heard. And you can also send written testimony if you're not able to testify in person, or you watch this afterwards and would like to add something. You can submit written testimony by emailing ccc.wm. That's ccc.wm for Ways and Means at boston.gov. Today's hearing is on docket number 1102, order relative to the adoption of classification in the city of Boston in FY 2021. And we're joined here today by Nicholas Arnello, our assessing commissioner for the city of Boston. And then afterwards, we'll also hear from Pam Coker, the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. So I think without further ado, I will hand it over to the assessor for his presentation.
Thank you for that introduction, Councillor Bach. Good afternoon to the rest of the councillors that are here. Here today, for the record, my name is Nicholas Arnello. I'm the Commissioner of Assessing for the City of Boston. I'm here today to discuss the adoption of the minimum residential factor, as well as the adoption of the residential exemption for fiscal year 2021. The residential factor is related to classification and our property tax rates. Basically, back in the 70s, the Commonwealth adopted a constitutional amendment that created the tax system we currently have, and that allowed for separately categorizing property based on its use, and then taxing those uses at different rates. So it provides for the potential to have two different tax rates. And so that is a system that Boston has adopted, also going back into the 70s, where we have a separate tax rate for residential property and a separate tax rate for commercial property. Some other communities have like one overall rate for everything, but we've adopted separate rates. Historically, we've adopted the minimum residential factor since the adoption of this two-rate system. And basically what that means is that it shifts some of the tax burden from residential property over to commercial property. And it makes it a lot more affordable for our residents to live in the city and own real estate. The other tool that we have at our disposal for kind of reducing the overall cost on our residents in terms of property taxes is the residential exemption. Boston is one of only 15 communities that has adopted a residential exemption. And since that program came into being also by statute back in 1983, Boston has always adopted the maximum residential exemption allowed by law. That percentage has changed a few times over the years. The most recent change was back in 2017. And at that point, Boston chose to start offering a residential exemption at 35%, which is the highest amount allowed by law. So these two programs in conjunction create an enormous amount of savings for our residents and create a average tax bill that is significantly less than many of the surrounding communities.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. And I guess I'll send the. Because I neglected to give my colleagues an opportunity for opening statements. So I think I'll just offer them the opportunity right now to ask questions, and I'll do my questions last. So Councillor Flynn, do you have questions for the commissioner or an opening comment?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bach. I just want to say thank you to you in the assessing department, the administration, for your important work on watching taxpayer money and overseeing this important program. It's important that we assist our homeowners, especially during this pandemic. It has impacted so many of our residents, families, and the business community as well. This is one way that we can help them by giving them maximum savings in the property tax. So I'm supportive of that. I guess my question is, Commissioner, talk a little about the assistance you provide, property tax assistance you provide to disabled veterans. How is that program going? Is it working? Give us a snapshot of that, please.
Sure. So yeah, the city of Boston has adopted a number of other exemption programs that fall under this bucket called personal exemptions. And those are programs for the elderly, as well as a number of veterans programs. Those programs they're going well. I think that that's something that we always need to continue to work on outreach and try and get the message out there so that our residents can take advantage of the programs that are available to them. One of the ways that outreach has been a little challenging this year, given the pandemic and the fact that we had to have video conference meetings instead of getting together in person. And so I think the last community meeting I was at was probably back in February. But we do a number of mailings, and we send out notices with people's tax bills to kind of get them the details of the program and to get the word out. We also work with the Office of Veterans Affairs, and we work with H Strong to also get out messaging as much as possible to try and reach these populations in their homes and where they are, so that everyone can hopefully get the benefits that our laws allow and that the city council and the mayor has allowed us to offer.
Thank you for that outreach to the veterans. I work with Commissioner Santiago frequently, so I appreciate the working relationship you have with the Veterans Department. Also, my final question, I know my colleagues aren't, talk a little about some assistance you provide for persons with disabilities, not veterans, but persons with disabilities that might receive assistance through some of your programs.
Yeah, so I can't think at the moment if there's a program that would specifically targets people with disabilities that is not related to a veterans program.
I wonder, Commissioner, down the road, if that's something we could consider, is persons with disabilities, allowing them some type of personal exemption on their property tax. I think it would go a long way to persons with disabilities able to stay in the city. They contribute so much. They make our city much, much better. They provide so much advocacy and input in making Boston the great city it is. But could we work together, maybe seeing how we could be helpful to persons with disabilities down the road?
I think we could definitely do that. And we actually do, there's one program that the state currently allows for blind exemptions. So we do offer that program. But I was thinking more broadly than that. And I think that is something that we could explore. It would require a change to current state law to create a new exemption program. But I think that's something interesting that we could talk about some more and figure out what makes sense there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Counselor, I don't have any further questions at this time. We'll probably do a second round, I guess, right?
Right. We'll give Pam an opportunity to speak as well, but I just wanted to get around for the commissioner in first. So Counselor Braden. Counselor Braden. All right, well, let me just text her and figure out she's having a challenge. And then in the meantime, I will ask my questions. So I wonder, when I was reviewing, Commissioner, you sent over a very helpful kind of review of the history of this. And I guess I should have said in the opening statement that I'm the sponsor of this item, which is traditionally sponsored by the Ways and Means Chair, but filed in sort of consultation with the administration, and specifically in consultation with the administration in light of the multi-decade long tradition in the city of Boston for trying to minimize the residential property tax burden. And so that's something that this piece of legislation is filed in my name, and something that I think is an important tradition to continue. And of course, the citizens of Boston have been an important part of moving classification originally, and the exemption at the state level in each instance. And I guess I wondered, Commissioner, if you could speak a little bit. It seems as though the series of legislative steps that have been taken over the decades, so you've got 78, 88, right? Then like 04, 07. It seems like a lot of that, in 2017, I think, most recently, has also been trying to adapt to an ongoing skew in residential versus commercial property values, like sort of how like, which is basically, right, for people watching at home, it's like if you can say, oh, we're going to split it so that the commercial properties in the city carry kind of this amount of weight of our property tax burden, which is most of what pays for our city budget, and residential carries this. But then if home prices shoot through the roof and commercial real estate stays relatively stable, because you're required by the state, for the city's required by the state to assess people at market value, right? So if these markets just get out of whack, you can end up with a situation where what you were trying to do to help homeowners, who might be folks who are house rich but cash poor, and especially our long-term homeowners in the city, you were trying to help them, but you're not helping them as much anymore because valuations have just gotten skewed in that way. And so it seems like several times there's been efforts to both to change factors and then to add the residential exemption itself. And so I guess I'm wondering, Commissioner, kind of where we are with those trends now. Maybe I'll ask you, where were we in January of this year? So prior to COVID, because I think we all have a big question mark about where valuations are going in the next 5 years in all kinds of categories. But I won't ask you to do too much crystal ball staring on that, but it would be helpful to understand, like, I know, what was the 2017 update? We're sort of, where are we? Does it feel like we're kind of in a pretty stable place, or like we're going to run into a similar issue again in relatively short order? Like, can you just speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So definitely. And also I probably should have mentioned this in the beginning as well. To the extent that you're offering up this order for adoption, this is an annual process where every year, in order to have a minimum residential factor and in order to have the residential exemption, that it's something that has to be voted on by city council and approved by the mayor. So I'm here on behalf of the administration and behalf of in support of these endeavors that you've offered, Councilor Buck. So in terms of kind of where we are and where we're going, our residential market has been strong, and has been strong for a while now. And if you put aside this year, because when we talk about tax stuff, we're always backwards looking. And so the values that we're looking at that go into our property values and that goes into this whole rate shift, right now, the values we're looking at are activity that occurred during calendar year 2019. So all of this activity is all pre-pandemic activity and pre-pandemic values. And at that point, 2019 was a very strong year. It was stronger for residential property than it was for commercial property. Commercial property didn't go down devastatingly to any degree. It's just the value of residential property, it looks like, is rose faster in 2019 than commercial property. And that's also been like a continuing trend for the past couple of years, where there's growth in both sectors, but residential is growing a little faster. And so that's leading towards the percentage of the overall budget, the overall levy that is being borne by residential property has been growing a little bit over the past few years. I think that's definitely something that we're going to need to think about and kind of take a look at moving forward into next year, when we take into account, what the impact of the pandemic has been on this past calendar year. Kind of figure out what makes sense for the city and how that would impact these laws, and if there needs to be changes or changes in how we look at things. But for what we're looking at right now, anything more than this would require a change to the law that there isn't really time to do before we have to have values finalized, because this is this piece of this process that goes into getting final certification from the state and then getting our bills issued. And so right now, the residential market is going to end up with a little bit more of the levy than they had last year. It's looking like once we get our numbers finalized. But next year, I think is going to be the big question mark about kind of whether it makes sense to have some changes to the structure.
And what is that? Just to give me a sense of what's the portion right now that's splitting residential and how, like, this year versus
Yeah.
last year?
So this year isn't finalized yet, so I can't give you exact numbers because until the state certifies those values, it's kind of like a ballpark guess. I can tell you last year, if you look at the overall values before classification. So if there was no rate shift, then last year residential property was almost 66% of the overall property value in the city for fiscal year 20. And then so the other commercial property specifically was about 29.5%. Industrial property was just over 0.5%, and then personal property was about 4%. So that was kind of how the overall bucket of value split up amongst those categories. And then the result last year of adopting the minimum residential factor is that residential property was responsible for 40% of the tax levy. And then commercial property was responsible for 51.5% of the overall tax levy. Industrial was responsible for just over 1%, and personal property was responsible for 7%. So you end up with this burden shift. That's what the rate shift does. Is basically, instead of the residential property paying the tax dollars that goes into the budget, it goes to commercial. And when there have been changes, specifically when there have been changes to classification, historically, and there's been statutory changes, it's been to kind of, in times where it looked like there might have been a dramatic swing of that tax burden back to residential to try and temper that.
Great, thank you. And can you clarify for me in your memo, you tried to give an example of this, so of how these two mechanisms save the residential taxpayers money. So for instance, that if we didn't have classification, and if we didn't have classification, it would just be like, we have a tax rate, the big, a Bank of America owned tower downtown and a home in a neighborhood, like everyone's going to pay the same rate. Which is not our situation, right? But if it were our situation, then, for example, right, you guys gave us the example that someone's got a house valued at $650,000. Their tax without classification would be $6,300. Their tax, but in our system instead, it's just under $4,000, so they're saving about $2,400 from classification. And then from the residential exemption, they're saving almost $3,000. Now, are those cumulative in this example? Like how? So that's what I was confused about, because
no, and it's a little bit of a tricky thing to provide an example for, because they are independent of each other, right? So in the example that we gave that you read off for classification, that is if we did not have classification, but the property was still getting a residential exemption. So in that example, classification is giving them that $2,400 savings on top of the residential exemption savings of $2,900. So I can provide examples that basically don't have the residential exemption in there. So there are two independent savings, right? There's the savings from classification, the savings from the exemption, and they do stack on each other. But
yeah, no, I understand, because the point is that what the exemption does, it exempts a certain amount of value, right? So then you would apply classification to whatever value is left. Right?
Yes.
So it's and so but for people like at home, like the residential exemption is. It's basically a flat it comes out for a taxpayer to about a $2,900 savings, assuming that your home is sufficiently valued, right? Is that fair?
Yes, that is fair. So in using last year as an example, so you basically, for residential property, if you get the exemption, you always have to pay at least 10% of your tax bill. That's where like this break even comes in. And so the residential exemption amount is a maximum. It is possible to get less than the maximum if your property is worth less or assessed for less. So if you had a property that was worth $250,000 last year and that was your assessment, you wouldn't have gotten the maximum residential exemption, because then you would have your bill would have gone negative.
So what's the floor? What's the minimum property value at which you get the full residential exemption?
So it changes from year to year. Last year, I want to say it was around 270, 280 grand.
Okay, so basically, so when we talk about, so we all understand what we're approving here, right? So with the residential exemption, it basically saves, and I'm going to round here, it basically saves any Boston resident who owns a home worth $300,000 or more. It saves them $3,000. Like, just, I'm rounding up slightly on both of those numbers, but it's something like that, right? Is that correct, Commissioner? Allowing for rounding?
Yeah, that's good ballpark. Yep.
Okay, and then what classification is doing is, it's if we had to tax all of commercial and residential property at the same rate, and try to fund the same city budget that we're funding today, right? Then we would, then the taxpayer, that it varies on the basis of the value of your home, but it's something like you'd be paying 50% or 60% again more in taxes.
Yeah, the classification, that's a better way to look at the classification savings, is more of a percentage basis. But yeah, your taxes would, it's because of and this is why the example can be a little confusing, because the residential exemption provides for a dramatic savings relative to your overall tax bill percentage, the lower the value of your home, right? But because the residential exemption is capped, so your $3,000 is going to go a lot further if you have a $300,000 home than if you have $1 million home.
Right.
And that's how the residential exemption kind of works, is it has that benefit that more directly impacts people that live in lower value homes. The classification impacts all residential property equally. And so that you can be more on a percentage basis. And so that, especially as your property value climbs up, your taxes would basically go up about 40, 50%, depending.
Right. And I think it's just important to note, and Councilor Mejia, I see your hand. I'll go to you in a second. I think it's important to note that classification and the residential exemption makes Boston's property taxes more progressive. When people talk about progressive taxation, right? Like, they make it so that they hit less on those who have less, right? Which would not be the case if we didn't have these various mechanisms that have been passed. And I think it's also important to note that we're in a situation where we're a commercial hub for the whole region. And so we have quite a lot of commercial activity. I guess one thing one question I just want to ask you, Commissioner, because it comes up all the time in the neighborhoods, is, well, could we give tax relief to small businesses, to could we classify within commercial between kind of our big companies and our little ones? And the thing that I've heard you say repeatedly to me and to others is that by state law, we're not allowed to do that. We're only allowed to treat it all as commercial. Is that right?
Yeah, so the problem with creating a system for commercial exemption, and it turns into an issue of more like an issue of renters versus homeowners than it does property types. So for both of these the residential exemption program specifically is for homeowners, right? So if you're renting in an apartment building, that is not savings that goes to you, right? So the apartment building doesn't get a residential exemption. You get it if you own your condo, you live there, you own your single family home, you live there, you can qualify for the residential exemption. And that program shifts that tax burden from the individual our owner occupants to the non-owner occupants in residential property. So it shifts tax burden from people that live in their homes to people that rent out to students or whoever, and also to larger residential properties. That burden gets shifted. The difficulty with commercial exemption concept is that the vast majority of commercial businesses, especially within Boston, don't own that property. And so the people that are responsible for paying the taxes are the property owners, not the tenants. And so to provide something or craft a statute that would give a benefit to a commercial tenant is a more complicated concept that the law doesn't currently allow for. So if we kind of have this system where, when this has come up before and when we talked about it before, my understanding is that the goal is to make it Boston more affordable for small businesses, right? Not just for business in general. And so the important distinction that you want to have is you want to make sure that those savings that we would create by statute would go to those small businesses and not to their landlords that could be multinational companies. And that's where the problem comes in is it's like you would want more of an owner occupied discount, and that's just such a small number of properties to be non-existent for commercial property.
Mm-hmm. No, that's helpful. Yeah, although I think certainly, yeah, it's still interesting to think about how many owner occupied businesses there are and whether that's something, whether we would be encouraging it if we created that type of classification, even if it were a relatively small number, because I think it might drive things back, and it might be interesting. And certainly one of the things we've heard from restaurant owners who do own their buildings is about that in this pandemic. But I want to go to Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia.
Sorry for being late, Madam Chair.
No worries. Happy to have you.
And everyone else who's here. I didn't want to be the only one missing, but I feel like I know I'm in this committee, so I wanted to show up and ask a few questions. So I only have 2 for now. Maybe I have some more. And then you took a long time, so are we doing 7 minutes?
No,
here?
go ahead. Go ahead. We're answering this
time frame.
No, you should go ahead and ask your questions. We've got a relatively limited group of counselors, and this is a very important fiscal decision for the city. So we're not gonna artificially rush it. So go ahead.
Applies more pressure. That's very important. So I hope my questions rise to this occasion. So I'm just curious about how many people this exemption will impacts, and what is the total dollar amount that will be saved. And I'm wondering, what is the breakdown by neighborhood of those who will qualify for this exemption? And I'm curious if if there are other exemptions that I can recommend for us to consider, or is that off the books?
Yeah, so those are good questions. I have the number. So I don't have the total number of residential exemptions that we gave out last year. It was in the neighborhood of like 78,000 properties that received it. But I can get you the final numbers. I just don't have them right here in front of me if you're interested in that.
Yeah, it would be great if you could just send them through the chair our way after the hearing. That'd be great.
Yeah. And the neighborhood breakdown is also an interesting question that I can try and figure that out. I'm not sure if I can figure it out before the vote tomorrow.
Oh my God, we're voting on this tomorrow?
Well, We may be, depending on the outcome of this hearing.
Oh, wait a minute. This is very important then. Hold on, Commissioner. Then wait 1 second. I would like to know that information. It's important to know. I mean, I don't want to delay a vote, Councilor Bach, but you just like, it would be helpful to know.
So I can definitely get you the total count. That should not be that's easy. Broken down by neighborhood, I just don't know that we keep the data in that way. Like if we do, then I can get that to you quickly.
Could you,
I'm not sure if we have it or not.
what about, sorry, could it be by zip code, Commissioner? Because if the issue is just that it's not mapped onto the ONS neighborhoods or something, I think like zip code would help to answer the.
No, it's really just whether we have it in our system attached to particular parcel numbers.
I don't understand that.
We might.
Because that makes, so I'm unclear. So help me, I'm sorry,
No.
Commissioner, you can help me understand the situation here. If these houses, they're getting a tax exempt, you should know where the address is, right? You should have that information.
No, so I have the information of which properties are getting the exemption. I'm not saying I don't have that. It's whether I have it in a format that I can easily like run it through a spreadsheet and go, oh, X number are in this ward. Like I can get it to you by ward, I get it to you by zip code, I get it to you by street. It's just how long it takes me to get the data to you. That's more, I'm more concerned about being responsive in a timely manner than like I can get you the data. I just need to find somebody that can work on it. And by the time the hearing's done, the day's going to be over. So that's my concern is more about the timing for tomorrow,
Right.
not in terms of getting you the numbers.
Yeah. Because I don't know how you guys format your, because if it's on an Excel, you could just do a sort and then it'll just give you the zip codes of those.
Yes, it's not tracked that cleanly. So we have about 160,000 parcels in the city, and the exemption system isn't tracked in the same system as our property data system.
Okay.
So I can't just go in and pull it myself. To be honest, no one's ever asked me before. That's why I'm just not sure how long it'll take me to get it to you. It might be super quick, but I don't want to overpromise, and then you're going to be like, where is it? Why didn't I get it back yet?
Okay, no, I'm going to manage everyone's expectations, but for the record, since we're being recorded right now, just want you to know that the next year when I ask you this question, you better figure it out, okay?
No, I'll definitely figure it out, and I will do everything that I can to get it to you as soon as possible.
Oh, no worries. I appreciate that answer. And then I don't want to ask any more challenging questions. I feel like I think I'm good. I don't want to scare anyone else anymore. I feel like I'm good. I think I don't have any other questions. Councilor Bach, I am just here to pay attention and listen and learn. I am curious about, recently everyone got letters about how their taxes were gonna get assessed. Is this part of this conversation or is that something else?
So that is part of what my department does, and that is part of the overall valuation process that we go through every year. This year is a special year. So this is why you got the disclosure notice. It's because it's part of the special process for state approval. That's our recertification or revaluation. The setting the residential exemption and setting the residential factor are also part of that same process. So they're not directly tied to each other, but they're both part of the same overall objective.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarity. And then I'm curious about the situation because there are a lot of people right now who are struggling just to even make their mortgage payments. And there have been people whose property taxes have increased just because of the the building that has popped up on their block. So now everything around their way increases too. So how are you guys reconciling that?
So we're obligated by state law to value everyone's property at the full market value every year. And so the valuation date that we're looking at, and that's what was tied to kind of the disclosure period and the opportunity for people to come let us know if something was wrong. That valuation date for fiscal year 21 is we're looking back at kind of what existed on January 1st, 2020. And for residential property, the way we drive those values is we use area sales. And so it wouldn't be, your taxes wouldn't go up because a new building got built unless that new building added a whole bunch of value to your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And depending on your neighborhood, it's possible that building detracted or could have, if you had a new T station built in your neighborhood, that would probably add a bunch of property value. Or at least it would have before the pandemic. Who knows what that's going to look like next year.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at in the question, so you can understand where I'm going with this, is that there are a lot of people already struggling to pay their property taxes. And then you have all of these luxury high rises and all these, buildings with bells and whistles, and you're still living with carpet and, no upgrades, but your property taxes are going up. And it just doesn't seem fair to me.
So this hearing is actually the perfect time for that question. So I really appreciate you asking that, because I think that'll maybe help me clarify part of the process. Yeah. So there are two kind of independent factors that go into your tax bill every year. There's the valuation part, which is what the disclosure notice was about, which is how much your stuff is worth. Then there's the tax rate part, which is what this hearing is for. And so the two tools that the city has and the city council has, and that the city council and the mayor need to work in kind of together to happen every year, is to the first tool is the residential exemption, because if the city council chooses not to approve the residential exemption, or they choose to approve it at a percentage lower than the maximum, which is 35%, the impact of that means that residential tax bills are going to go up no matter what happened to their property value. So because it basically and Councilor Bach had mentioned this earlier, it's our residential exemption program has elements of a progressive tax program. And by that, what I mean is that it creates more savings for lower valued property and less savings for higher valued property. So if you have a $300,000 condo, your tax bill last year would have dropped from $3,200 for the whole year down to just under $300 for the whole year. So that was a significant savings that the city council allowed for last year in conjunction with the administration to kind of help keep homes affordable in the city for our residents. And then if you have a higher valued home, you would still get a significant savings if you qualify for the exemption. It just percentage wise, it isn't as much. So if you had a higher valued home last year, say a condo about $650,000, your taxes without the exemption would have been about $6,900. And then with the exemption, they dropped to just under $4,000. So they save the same amount of money, but that money means more to the lower valued property in terms of what their overall bill is for the year than it does for the higher valued property. So it's one way for us to provide an extra level of assistance to lower valued properties. And then the other factor too in all of this is the adopting the minimum residential factor, which I spoke about a little bit in the beginning. You might have missed that part, but the Cliff Notes version of that is it basically takes the the tax burden in our city, and it pushes that burden onto commercial property from residential property to make it more affordable for, and don't think about it like it pushes it from poor homeowners to poor businesses. All of these things are relative in terms of scale. And so where there's that shift, it's shifting it from lower value property really to higher value property. And so higher value property pays a larger percentage of our overall burden. Think multi-million-dollar office towers, not mom and pop sandwich shops.
Yeah, so I think Councilor Bach is gonna come out with the gravel soon, and I have a 4:30, so I don't wanna monopolize the whole entire time. I'm glad that I came through for this portion of the conversation, but I do believe that there's still, for me, Councilor Bach, so is something gonna be put on the?
Yeah, so if I can jump in, Councilor Mejia, so I would just say the answer to your question is that what this piece of legislation proposes to do is to give the maximum relief that we, the city, are allowed to exactly that residential homeowner you're asking about. Okay. Absent this piece of legislation, like that person's tax bill would go up $3,000, $6,000. Like and basically it's just that this is as low as we're allowed to make residential tax bills compared to commercial ones like in the city for the state law. So I think, so to me, now I guess the question, Commissioner, would be my understanding is that the city council has to make this determination prior to you being able to tell the Department of Revenue at the state what we're doing. What's the timeline on that formal notification to deal with from you? So
the timeline on that is obviously the city council. You control when you guys vote. The process for all of this is to try and have finalized tax bills for the third quarter that have the finalized rate on them. If we don't have a vote one way or another tomorrow, then it would jeopardize our ability to mail tax bills out by the end of December.
Right. So that's why, Councilor Mejia, I would just stress that to me, I want to be clear, like, it's not just like this is some administration priority. It's like precisely because of how people are hurting right now. Okay. I think it's very important for us to kind of continue in the tradition we've established before of giving the residential taxpayers that maximum relief.
Oh, no, I'm in full agreement, Commissioner. I was still trying to get up to speed in terms of what conversation I was walking into. I had some questions that my team helped me prepare, but I think that we should definitely, I don't know what the vote, I'm in support of this. If it's gonna help those who need it most, absolutely. So I'm good.
Great. All right, great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. And I do want to now recognize Pam Coker, who's been with us this whole time from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. Pam. And want to ask her to offer some comments on behalf of the Municipal Research Bureau on this subject. You're muted, Pam.
Hello, good afternoon, and thanks for letting me join the conversation. Councilor Bach and members of the committee, my name is Pam Coker. I am the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. I am also a City of Boston resident, although not a homeowner at this time. As I was sitting here as we got ready for this hearing, I was thinking that a year ago, end of November, beginning of December 2019, we had this annual hearing, and the Research Bureau soon after released a report on property value trends of recent years, with a focus on the contribution of unprecedented economic growth and renewed interest in city living. And of course, a year later, today, we sit with much uncertainty about the near-term and long-term future of our city, and with hope that the latest developments in vaccines will help our city return to what we knew, or hopefully something even better, and allow our residents and businesses to regroup and move forward. This is said knowing that for members of our community who are already challenged for resources before the pandemic, the road to recovery may well be far more difficult, and those folks may benefit from additional supports, including some additional housing stability. And as was just suggested before Councilor Bach turned it over to me, that there is particular urgency around making these opportunities presented through classification and a residential exemption to provide some of that kind of support for folks struggling to maintain their housing if they are in fact homeowners in the city. I just wanted to highlight a couple of aspects of the conversation and dynamics of both classification and the residential exemption opportunity for residential homeowners in Boston. As we heard earlier, the tax classification process allows the city to shift the property tax burden to business property up to 175% of what its share would be without classification. And the question is, what does this mean? It means preferential tax treatment for residential property owners. And in large part to ensure we have a city made up of residential neighborhoods and businesses, both large and small. Boston homeowners are the beneficiaries of the city's application of property tax classification to the property tax system in the city each year. For fiscal year 2021, the city proposes to continue to shift as much of the tax burden onto business property as allowed by state law. And that makes us think about, without classification, residential property taxpayers would see their property taxed at a much higher rate. Because the city implements tax classification, for example, for fiscal year 2020, business property accounted for just 34% of the city's total property value, but paid 60% of the total tax levy. Residential property represented 66% of the total property value, but paid just 40% of the total tax levy. The fiscal year 2020 classified tax rate for residential property was $10.56 per thousand of property value, while the classified tax rate for commercial, industrial, and personal property, together known as business category, is $24.92 per thousand of property value. So that just demonstrates in the numbers, the shift from relief for residential to increase on business. However, that shift of property tax burden from the residential to the business property, as we've discussed already a bit, results in substantial savings for the city's residential taxpayers. In the fiscal year 2020, on average, classification saved a single family homeowner over $2,300. And it's about that, a little more or a little bit less for a residential condo, a 2-family home and a 3-family home. So all types of residences that are owned can benefit from this issue. And as noted before by Nick and others, those numbers are just about classification. They don't include the additional benefit of the residential exemption, a further reduction in property taxes for those homeowners. In 2020, the residential exemption amount was just under $3,000, equivalent to a property value reduction of $272,000 and $2,072,707. But together, classification and the residential exemption reduce the average single-family tax bill for eligible residential taxpayers to far less than what it would have been without these tax savings. If the city did not shift residential property tax burden onto business, the residential property tax burden would increase substantially by hundreds of millions of dollars. And this has me just thinking a little bit about where we are today in terms of the challenge of the pandemic and the economic challenges that many in our city face because of it, as well as thinking about what might be coming for us next to be able to provide both residential exemption and the benefit of classification to homeowners in the city is something that clearly the business community takes on additional burden, but part of that is to ensure that we have a community that also has a strong residential presence. But it will be very interesting to see going forward if recent concerns about housing prices, as well as folks wanting to work remote or depart from cities across the country, may change the residential dynamics in the city, and some of those same concerns or interests in changing residences or looking at city living a bit differently may also well change the presence of business in the city of Boston. So be very interested to see how the next year turns out, what we all experience together as a city and as a community, and the challenges that may lie ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam. I want to turn it over to colleagues for any questions for Pam. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Council Block, and thank you, Pam, for your presentation and for your leadership in the city. Pam, I represent, as you know, the downtown area, the business community. It's in recent stats said the occupancy rate is 15% maybe of businesses in the downtown area. If that trend, maybe 20%, if that trend continues for an extended period, what is the city looking at if the downtown area with the business community not having those employees? What does that mean to the city of Boston? What does it mean to its tax base? And what are there any projections that you could make to help the city during this difficult time?
In terms of projections, I wouldn't want to do any projecting right now, but just thinking about the potential for impacts. The Research Bureau office is in Downtown Crossing, and we see a change that I think is very much related to fewer large businesses allowing their employees to work in those downtown office buildings. More folks are from those larger office buildings are working remotely, and we do see that there is less traffic in Downtown Crossing. More of the small businesses there have closed, at least temporarily, if not permanently. And so we see what hopefully will not become a long-term reality. But at the moment, certainly it's very clear that neighborhoods, downtown neighborhoods that rely on office workers are struggling for sure. So there's the question as the city looks to reopen more broadly its economy and revitalize or reinvigorate parts of the downtown. How do we do that successfully so that we can return the consumers of some of those restaurants and smaller businesses that are trying to stay alive?
And as a follow-up, Pam, how long, well, two parts of this. How long is the city able to, how long is that trend able to continue before it has such a devastating financial impact on the city? Mm-hmm. And then maybe my last question is, what are you seeing in terms of the South Boston waterfront with property taxes, with businesses, business community down in the South Boston waterfront? Maybe if you're able to focus on those two.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So for downtown, how long can that continue? I imagine for some of the small businesses, despite the city looking to provide some resources to help small businesses continue, we're seeing many small businesses close in that area of the downtown. But again, if office workers start returning, in a pretty substantial way, particularly with the promise of the vaccine and actually hopefully getting to see that have an impact in the spring. I would hope that some would come back. The Southwestern waterfront and the seaport, it's interesting. There seems to be a lot going down there when I go through there. And I don't know why that would be different, but maybe the new development there, plus a lot of new fancy stores, maybe it's still a novelty and people are looking to get out and about with some space and enjoy those areas. Certainly not an expert on these things, but that is what I have been able to observe, keeping up to date on different neighborhoods in the city.
No, that information is very helpful. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Councilor Buck.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. And yeah, Pam, I would definitely thank you for being here on behalf of the Municipal Research Bureau, and also just say, I mean, I said I wouldn't make Nick crystal ball gaze, and I won't make you do it either, but I think as someone who also represents a lot of downtown neighborhoods adjacent to Councilor Flynn, I think we're all very concerned about the future, both on the commercial and residential side, frankly. I mean, just about the only thing that everyone seems to be confident is continuing to go up is lab. But just given the kind of continuing research center nature, and obviously we've recently seen some pretty exciting developments out of those labs when we're looking at the vaccine, which is so critical to our recovery. So I won't ask you to crystal ball gaze, but I do think that a thing I want to say on this occasion is just that the whole legislative history that Nick and I were talking about is one of adapting to a changing environment to make sure that we're keeping, a vibrant and diverse set of folks in the city of Boston. And that as the landscape changes, if it changes in big ways in the next 3 years, let's say, because as Nick has noted, these are going to be lagging indicators on the property tax side. I mean, I think certainly we on the council, the administration, you folks at the Research Bureau, and lots of other stakeholders need to be proactive about saying, do the tools we have work? Do we need to ask the State House for other tools as our predecessors have successfully, right? And just sort of remain flexible about how to support that vibrant ecosystem, because I'm a big believer in, neighborhoods and, a vibrant city core that really has commercial and residential mixed in together. And so would be very concerned about kind of either of those starting to fall by the wayside. So I think just, and obviously to the extent that you guys are doing any research or receiving information about trends from your members, that's something that the council is really interested in. So
terrific. All right, we'll keep that in mind, certainly. Thank you.
Thanks again for being here. And I think it's important to have this continuity in this conversation. It's, I think that it's a funny thing that if you asked me a year ago, you made the point, Pam, about kind of what you would have said a year ago and where we are now. And certainly I've had a long running concern and continue to about our city tax base not being as diverse as other major cities in the country, right? So we know New York's got an income tax, Chicago's got a sales tax. This means that there's a kind of diversity of sources, and we have everything pinned to property tax. And that has some major downsides. And one of them is that it burdens our residential homeowners, right? And especially our long-term ones who are holding that value instead of accessing it. And so the cities, has to continue to come up with tools to deal with that. It also obviously incentivizes development and new growth in a certain way, particularly because of Prop 2.5. So I continue to have lots of policy concerns about all that. I think it's worth noting that because of that structure, we are in a better financial position in this moment than our peer cities who are reliant on taxes that are much more economic cycle driven, right? Is that a fair characterization, would you say?
Yeah, and ironically, with the prior recession, that in part added to more of a push for diversity in revenue sources. So we got the meals tax and we got an increase on the hotel motel tax, additional piece for cities and towns. And for the first time, piece of the meals tax for cities and towns. So that was an opportunity then. Now we have those revenues, and they are the ones that are struggling the most because of the dynamics that come with this public health situation. And it's the property tax base that is, as you point out, is for now, as of last year, this year, hopefully the coming year, continuing to be a very strong foundation.
No, it is. I mean, these are unpredicted times for sure. But I do know we've been joined by Councilor Arroyo. And Councilor Arroyo, we're just coming to the end of the hearing, and I wouldn't want to necessarily run back through the whole thing. But if you had targeted questions that you wanted for either the Commissioner Arnello or for Pam from the Municipal Research Bureau, or a brief statement, I'd be happy to entertain any of those.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I'm fine. I know that I'm coming in late, so I'll just rewatch it rather than have some question that has already been answered be re-asked. So I'll just watch it, and I'll go through the whole thing myself. And if I have any follow-up questions that aren't in there, I'll email. What's the appropriate? Should I email you or should I email them directly?
No, if you email me, we'll get those questions over to them formally so that we get a record.
Perfect. So I'll do it that way, but I'll rewatch the hearing just to make sure that I'm up to date on everything that's been discussed.
Great. And Michelle Goldberg also circulated a 3-page memo from the assessor that's got some pretty helpful kind of context information. So that should
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think there's lots of further byways we could go down. That just reminded me of one of them, and I'll be brief, Commissioner. But if you mentioned the fact that we assess, so we're required by the state to assess at market value, at full market value, right? And we do that based on sales for residential properties. On commercial properties, is it always based on sales, or is there also I have in my head some kind of a gross revenue measure that can also be used? But what I don't clearly understand is sort of in which case is one, in which case is the other. And it's come up a few times from, again, sort of constituent businesses in my district. And I was wondering if you could, since we have you here, just speak to that a little bit, since obviously we are proposing here in this to shift, as we have every year, taxes onto the commercial side. So it'd be helpful for the council to understand how those are calculated.
Yeah, no, of course. So in the valuation world, there are like 3 main buckets of valuation methodology. So there's a sales approach, income approach, and a cost approach. And so for residential property, sales approach works really well for creating a model to capture what the property is going to be worth, what it's going to transact at. So for commercial property, it doesn't work very well within our tax system. And the reason for that is a bunch of different court decisions and laws and regulations around how we're allowed to value property. So a lot of times the argument is for a commercial property, because an office tower is probably the easiest example. So you have an office tower, let's say you have 20 floors and there are 5 tenants in it, and the tenants each have a 10-year lease. A lot of times what someone is buying is they're buying that income stream. So they're buying those leases. So when they take over the building, they're taking over those leases. And so there's value for those leases. There's value based on what the quality of those tenants are that have those properties, how likely they are to make back those payments. And you don't have that for residential property that's not rented. And so if you try and use sales to justify commercial values, a lot of times they're disqualified, because they're determined that that sales price wasn't just for the pure real estate, it was for those revenue streams going into the future. And so you're valuing more than just the property. And it can actually have an impact up or down. So if you have really good tenants, or you negotiated really favorable rents and then rents drop, that property could be worth more than one that's vacant that would lease up at current rents that are lower than what that property is already encumbered by. So for commercial property, the approach that most closely hews to appropriate market value for our taxation system is the income approach. And so the income approach, what we do is we market to market. So we we send out a whole bunch of information requests throughout the city to try and determine what current lease activity is and what space is renting for. And then we use that current market activity to create a model of what any individual building would sell for if it were fully leased up at current market rates on the lien date. And then we also factor in expense information and capitalization rates that change year to year from a whole bunch of different factors. And so it's a more complicated model, but it can create more accurate values. And those values are more defensible if they get contested and we have to go to court to justify our assessments. So we have a pretty strong record of being able to defend our assessments using that valuation model methodology. Then the third methodology is cost, and cost methodology we use for, it's more like special purpose stuff. So like random one-off properties that don't rent. We also use costs to value personal property.
Got it. And are there any commercial properties that we value on the sales basis? I just know that I've heard specifically in my district concern about kind of Newbury Street and a feeling of kind of getting locked in based on certain activity, people getting locked into very high property tax values that then drives the need for very expensive leases and then limits kind of the range of businesses that landlords can kind of economically justify hosting on the street or whatever, right? Like, so it's a very active conversation in my district. And I just wanted to be clear on, do any of our, like on Newbury Street, would any of those buildings be valued on a sales basis? Or would it all be income? Like, would it all be this income basis? And then my other question related to that is, because Newbury Street has a lot of them, how do you think about buildings that are like have residential up top and commercial below if they have the same owner?
Yeah, so we usually, I don't want to say we never value something on sales. A lot of times sales is like a backup methodology to verify and like see if the income approach is working well. So our modeling for commercial property and like Newbury Street's a good example. Our modeling for Newbury Street is all based on income. But we do pay attention to sales in the area because you can have a sale of a property that would be a market value if the property that's sold with market rate rents as of the lien date. So if you had this fully occupied property and what it was leasing out for was what current market activity is, if someone started a new lease, then that sale might be useful to support a value. But that's more the conversation we have once someone contests their value, and not the process that we go through before we set value. So when we set value with our model, it's set with an income approach. But then if someone is looking for an abatement or they go to file an appeal, we might have a conversation with them in terms of defending our value. And at that point, we might bring in sales as part of the defense strategy. And by defense, it's more of justification. We're not attached to our values being correct. It's not that what we say is automatically right. It's that we want our data to be accurate. And so we want our assessments to reflect accurate values in the market.
Got it. And yeah, and I may follow up at some point as a district counselor. I have probably an ongoing interest in the Newbury Street valuation question and kind of how to, just because we really want to retain and strengthen that kind of central jewel of a street that also draws a lot of tourists, draws feeds a lot of other business in the area. And so just the number of vacancies there that we had pre-pandemic and that have been exacerbated by a pandemic has us particularly concerned. But I think I'll put my Chair of Ways and Means hat back on and follow up with you as the District 8 counselor on that on a future occasion. Yeah, go ahead.
I just realized I didn't answer your mixed use question.
Right.
So that we also value on an income approach, and apartment buildings in general, like more than 4 units, anything more than a 3-family, we value using an income approach as well. So it's residential property, but we use an income approach because it's easier to create a model that's more accurate. The other aspect of this is that those properties you don't have the same volume of sales that you do for condos and single families as you do for commercial properties, and the unique characteristics, especially mixed use properties, the income methodology makes more sense.
Yeah, got it. Okay, I think those are all my questions, and I want to wrap up the hearing. I just want to check with Councillor Flynn if he'd like to make any final closing remarks.
Just thank you to Nick, and thank you to Pam. Thank you to my City Council colleagues and City Council Central staff for putting this hearing on. Thank you, Councilor Buck.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Councillor Flynn, for your attention and interest in this. And I think we share this downtown core and a combination of both very important commercial uses, right, for the city, and also a lot of residents. So really grateful for your partnership on this.
Thank you.
And also, yes, very grateful to the commissioner for being here and for answering all of our questions, and for your work on behalf of the city of Boston, and to Pam and the Boston Municipal Research Bureau for their long-running work in support of the city and the city's fiscal health. Before I close out the hearing, I do want to give an opportunity for public testimony. I don't think we've had anyone sign up, but I do see one attendee in the waiting room. So I'm just going to admit, if Cindy, if you're able to raise your hand if you wanted to make a comment. And then in case, I'm just gonna check. Cindy, did you wish to make a comment? Okay, seeing none. I think in that case, we will. Before I adjourn, I should just say for those watching that it is my intention as the Chair of Ways and Means to recommend tomorrow that we pass this order so that the assessor can move forward with notifying DOR that we would like to take advantage of the maximum residential exemption and the maximum and the do we say minimum or maximum residential factor, Nick?
It's the minimum residential factor.
Minimum residential factor in order to just make sure that in this really difficult time that we're giving the most relief that we possibly can to our residential homeowners in the city of Boston. And so that's what I'll be recommending tomorrow. And again, grateful to everyone for being here today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you so much, all.
Thank you, Kenzie.
Yep. Bye.